I was visiting in the back with Derek, and he was showing me. He went up to Oklahoma, and there's kind of a antique car rally, and we were talking about it. And he was showing me the Studebaker, that the guy that runs the program there, and I said, "Man, that's a nice looking car. I mean, it's in great shape." And he said, "Yeah, and it's even got an AM radio. But you have to wait for it to warm up." And I said, "I can identify with that. I have to I have to warm up in the morning to get going, right?" And I think we all can associate with that. This week we're looking at Solomon's wisdom. We're in 1 Kings chapter 3 and 4, with just a little peek into 2 Chronicles chapter 1. Last week we talked about the final words and actions of David to ensure that the right kind of legacy was delivered to Solomon, his son. A legacy of leadership, of concern, practicality and grace, and one of peace and trust in God. Where Saul and David were born among common people and grew up among the villages and countryside, Solomon was born in the palace of Jerusalem. The name Solomon comes from the Hebrew word shalom, means peace or peaceable. And he grew up among men of power. He had seen heights of royal glory and chaos of rebellion. He was well educated. He never knew poverty or hunger. But he did know the consequences of intrigue, jealousy, and murderous hate. Before he grew to maturity, several of his brothers had met violent deaths. The world at the end of David's death, where Solomon knew anything other than a unified Hebrew nation, which was strong in a chaotic world. David had been shaken several times by internal rebellion, but it was still one nation at the end of David's life. And this was a legacy that he passed on to his son. David's personal strength and genius contributed greatly to that unity, but just as importantly, the weakness of all the other nations in ancient Near East helped. Egypt had suffered serious international setbacks at the beginning of the 12th century, from which she did not recover for 2 centuries. During this time, Egypt was unable to prevent militarily the rise of Saul and David, or the extensive activities and political maneuvers to embarrass our neighbors. To that end, we find ourselves stepping into chapter 3, with Solomon marrying a daughter of Pharaoh. This must have been a bitter pill for Egypt to swallow, allowing the marriage of the Pharaoh's daughter to the very slaves they had owned to maintain a political peace. Verse 1 of chapter 3. Solomon made a marriage allegiance with the Pharaoh, king of Egypt. He took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her into the city of David until he had finished building his own house and the house of the Lord around the wall around Jerusalem. Now, he didn't bring this bride right straight to the palace, because the Ark of the Covenant was there in the same compound. And he didn't think that she should live in proximity to that. So he housed her in the old part of Jerusalem until he could build her a palace. And that took roughly 4 years into his reign to get that built. Overall, it took 20 years to build the house, the palace, and the temple. And so she remained in those quarters for over 16 years. In exchange, Pharaoh gave Solomon the city of Gezer. Now this city was very crucial in the commerce of that time because it stood between Jerusalem and the port city of Joppa. So it was important to get that city because that opened up the door. That allowed the flow of that commerce to move from Joppa into Jerusalem. All the building materials that were necessary, especially the cedars of Lebanon. So my question at the beginning of this is, was this marriage the beginning of Solomon's spiritual compromise? Truly, the devil waits for any opportunity to weaken our faith. There is some indication that the writer of Kings was concerned about the spiritual danger of decentralized worship at the various high places in the absence of the temple. In Numbers 33, Israel was forbidden to worship in the high places because the Canaanites had their Asherah poles, and they had all these symbols that were part of their heathen worship. But all those things had been torn down, and so God did allow them to worship in the high places. Even Solomon worshipped at the high place of Gibeon, which was the highest. We pick up again in verse 2 through 4. The people were sacrificing at the high places. However, because no house had yet been built for the name of the Lord, Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of David his father. Only he sacrificed and made offerings at the high places. And the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. Solomon used to offer 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. That took a bit of time, didn't it? To offer 1,000 burnt offerings. But it showed that he did have devotion to God. He was still in the right place within his heart. Verses 5 through 9. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask what I shall give you." And Solomon said, "You have shown great and steadfast love to your servant David my father, because he walked before you in faithfulness, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart towards you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and had given him a son to sit on his throne this day. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of David my father. Although I am but a little child, I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of your people, whom you have chosen, a great people, too many to be numbered or counted for multitude. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil, for who is able to govern this, your great people?" When he speaks of being a little child, it's not in the sense that we think that he's very small as a child, but it's that he lacks the experience that he needs. And as the scripture tells us, there is a great concern that's on his heart about just how large this effort is to govern all of the Israelites. Because at this time, the nation is as large as it's ever been. It stretches from river to sea, from mountains to shore. And so there is a lot to be done. And he is aware of all the example that his father has shown him, again, through that legacy of love and uprightness in heart. This was a significant spiritual experience also in Solomon. Gibeon was an ancient high place, and it was the place where the Mosaic tabernacle and bronze altar stood just a few miles northwest of Jerusalem. God appeared to Solomon by means of a dream, and the structure of which was a dialogue between God and Solomon. The initial approach was made by God with a simple request: ask what you want from God. For Solomon had been worshiping God by means of sacrifice, and there was a wide range of possibilities that lay before him. But he made a single request based on what God had done for David, his father, and in his own sense of inadequacy. In spite of Solomon's quick and decisive treatment of his rivals, his initial diplomatic success with Egypt, and his popular response to his religious assemblies, he felt inferior to his task internally. In the presence of God, the young king saw his need clearly and confessed it. His request for wisdom from God so he could rule his people properly and justly. We pick up in verse 10. It pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this. And God said to him, because you have asked this, and have not asked for yourself long life or riches, or life of your enemies, but have asked for yourselves understanding to discern what is right, behold, I now do according to your word. Behold, I give you a wise and discerning mind, so that none like you has been before you, and none like you shall rise after you. I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that no other king shall compare with you all your days. And if you walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days. And Solomon awoke, and behold, it was a dream. Then he came to Jerusalem and stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and offered up burnt offerings and peace offerings, and made a feast for all his servants. That was quite a dream, wasn't it? To have a conversation directly with God. To ask and be blessed with a wise and discerning mind. To be told there will be none like you, before you, after you, until the time of Jesus, really. But he also gave him a warning. If you walk in my ways, keep my statutes, my commandments, as your father walked, then I will lengthen your days. I'm reminded how God not only gives us the ability to discern godly wisdom from worldly wisdom, but how he has laid out the differences clearly in his word. So why is this important? I'm sure you're a lot like me. We don't know everything, and we sometimes seek out help or advice from someone else. Advice given often leads us through challenging situations and towards what we hope will be a new and better direction. At this season of life, we probably have more friends that have a DR in front of their name. So for medical issues, we tend to connect with the doctors in a specific field for their advice, prescription, anything to help us continue in our health. For legal matters, we seek out attorneys to advise us and lead us through. But for the Christian, do we always look to the chief advisor, the one from whom all wisdom and knowledge flows? James 3:13 through 17 characterizes the difference between earthly wisdom and spiritual wisdom. It shows that earthly wisdom is natural intelligence combined with ego, combined with energetic ambition to produce certain effects in the world. And we can see those effects that are produced much in the world. Whether it's through moving from horses and carriages to automobiles, to planes, spaceships, or whether it's things like that are introduced like artificial intelligence, which is scary just in the name itself. Those are still earthly wisdom. Spiritual wisdom, on the other hand, is tied to righteousness and the fruit of the Spirit. Who is wise and understanding among you? By his conduct, let him show works in the meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not boast and be false to the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where jealousies and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. But the wisdom from above is first pure, peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. Solomon showed he was ready to handle those riches and the prestige by valuing them less than the wisdom and discernment that he had been granted. He began his reign with the blessings of God upon him, motivated by a personal commitment to God. The young king focused on his role as guardian of the covenant that God had made with his nation Israel, and as the heir of the promises God had made to his father David. He also realized that this dream was an authoritative message from God. That's why he hurried back to Jerusalem to make those additional offerings at the ark. That's why he had all of his officials of his court join him in a feast, thanking God for granting him this great wisdom and understanding. There are times when we need more wisdom and discernment. I think we can all agree to that. There are times when we need more purity in our lives, where we need to be more peaceable with those around us, more gentle, more open to reason, and especially more merciful. Back in chapter 3, Solomon's going to demonstrate some of that supernatural wisdom. In verses 23 through 28, it was customary in this day and time for kings to meet with the people, because they basically were the Supreme Court of the day. They had the final word on any issues. And such was the case of the two harlots that came before Solomon, to ask for his judgment on which one should keep this child. Then the king said, "The one says, 'This is my son that is alive, and your son is dead.' And the other says, 'No, but your son is dead, and my son is the living one.' And the king said, 'Bring me a sword.' So a sword was brought before the king. And the king said, 'Divide the living child in two, and give half to the one and half to the other.' Then the woman whose son was alive said to the king, because her heart yearned for her son, 'O my lord, give her the living child, and by no means put him to death.' But the other said, 'He shall neither be mine or yours. Divide him.' Then the king answered and said, 'Give the living child to the first woman, and by no means put him to death. She is the mother.' And all Israel heard of the judgment that the king rendered, and they stood in awe of the king, because they perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to do justice. This wisdom became a source of wonderment, and in this case undoubtedly represented a sample of the cases that demonstrated his wisdom. And as this and other reports circulated throughout the nation, the Israelites recognized that their king's prayer for wisdom had been answered by God. As we step into chapter 4, we're going to see that wisdom applied in a different way. The appointments were made to different offices for various responsibilities of government, so it would run smoothly in commerce. They were similar to those identified by David, except for the expansion of the district officers, who were to collect taxes and supply the central government with 1 month's supply each year. During the rest of the year, they were to collect and store the provisions in the warehouse within the district. To better understand how much this was, one day's provision for the king and his court consisted of over 300 bushels of flour, 700 bushels of meal, 10 fat oxen, 20 pasture-fed cattle, 100 sheep, plus a litany of other animals and fattened fowls. One source said that there was over 1,500 people associated just with his court, just at the palace alone. And then to that added the army. He had a fighting force of 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, who were stationed in Jerusalem and other chariot cities throughout the nation, and supplied them with barley and hay to each steed. Second Chronicles 1, chapter 1, 14 through 17 gives us a little deeper glimpse into that. in that it talks in verse 15 about the king made silver and gold as common in Jerusalem as stone. And he made cedar as plentiful as the sycamore of the Sheplah. And he imported horses from Egypt and Cube. And the king traders would buy them for a price. They imported a chariot for 600 shekels of silver and a horse for 150. Likewise, through them, these were exported to all the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Syria. Now, assuredly, trying to support all this caused a great load on the balances that were kept in the treasury. It caused a burden of taxation in each district. All the kings and princes of the subject provinces paid tributes in the form of money, gifts, and in kind. And these were all done on a fixed rate each and every year, as we're told in 1 Kings 10:25. The total amount brought into the treasury in gold, exclusive of all payments in kind, was 666 talents. And as you remember from Keith's lesson last week, a talent equated to a large amount. It was many days' work. 666 talents is just astronomical in this day and age. But the Lord was not slack in his promise. He delivered this peace and prosperity. He delivered this wealth. And he delivered this lack for nothing. The organizations were efficient and wise in the essence of maintaining a state of that prosperity and progress. But it was all at the hand of God that it happened. We wonder sometimes about the nation we live in, don't we? It is a land of prosperity for some. It is a land of peace for most. It's not a land where people find themselves lacking nothing. It is a land, compared to others, that is so far apart. And yet, it would be a land that would be even further if, for one thing, if this land would turn itself back to the Lord. There's a lot of work yet to be done. Back in Kings 4:29 through 34. And God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure, and breadth of mind like the sand on the seashore, so that Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the people of the East and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all other men, wiser than Ethan the Ezrahite, and Herman, and Kekel, and Darda, the sons of Mahal. And his fame was in all surrounding nations. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. He spoke of trees, of the cedar that is in Lebanon, to the hyssop that grows out of the wall. He also spoke of beasts, and of birds, and of reptiles, and of fish. All the people of all nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. We see in this particular piece of scripture the use of the word sand. Sand is used elsewhere in the Bible to describe innumerable populations, a vast amount of grain, or an overwhelming weight of anguish. As applied to Solomon, the analogy seems to point to the enormous depth of his wisdom. It was greater than the sages of his time, both in Mesopotamia and Egypt, and produced volumes of proverbs and literature and song. Solomon outshone them all. Ethan the Ezrahite and Heman both have one of their psalms in the Bible, Psalm 88 and 89. Ethan, Heman, Kakal, and Darda are also named as prominent descendants of one of Judah's in 1 Chronicles 2:6. They were well known for their wisdom, but it paled in comparison to Solomon. Solomon wrote 3,000 proverbs, 582 which are in the book of Proverbs. Of the 1,005 songs, only one is in the Song of Solomon, which appears in the Bible. He also built a royal garden, and his interest in animals and birds and reptiles were based on some of his proverbs. Emissaries came from all over the world to listen to Solomon, the most notable being the Queen of Sheba, as shown in 1 Kings 10, 1 through 10. For the first time under Solomon, Israel experienced a relative consistent period of peace and prosperity. The internal factions in the nation were balanced in a delicate and, for the most part, workable relationship. The recurrent tribal feudings and court-related revolts were a thing of the past. The standard of living in the nation climbed to unprecedented heights, and the availability of luxury items and materials was open to a large portion of at least the urban population. International relationships had their tense moments, but no serious crises. For the time being, a network of treaties effectively kept diplomatic and commercial lines open and functioning. No known wars scarred the landscape or played havoc with the affairs of men. The next chapter was about to be written in Solomon plunging into the work of building the temple to provide a national worship center, a name for the Lord that would be a unifying force religiously. For the first time in Israel, its leadership had a successful example of passing of power from father to son. The reign of Solomon served to make actual and legitimate the covenant God made with David concerning the continuity of the house of David, ruling in power in Israel. The establishment of this principle of succession was to be the prime stable factor in Israel during the span over the next 3 centuries. It can be said that Solomon and his nation had both the opportunity and resources to spread the message of the living God throughout the ancient East. Question is, would they? As Christians and members of his body, the church, we face a similar challenge. We have both the opportunity and the resources to spread the message. At the same time, we're painfully aware of our flaws, our failings, our challenge, and how easy it is to fall into compromise. Solomon's example was placed there so we can understand why God is wanting to save us from a failing and sinful world. We have elected to be his instruments. Let us take on that purpose and bring about a harvest of righteousness sown in peace by those who make peace. I chose the song Be Still and Know That I Am God for a specific reason. Because our world today is chaotic. And we are interrupted constantly by things that will draw us away. I really appreciated the words this morning that Keith brought. It showed just how easy it is to say yes, but really mean no. Or to say no, but yet realize you want to be saying yes. May we all get closer to His Word during the time of study and strengthen our faith. And may we all keep that song in our heart to be still and know that I am God. Next week, James Sudlett is going to pick up the examination of Solomon as he accomplished to build the temple. And it's at this time that I want to take the opportunity to thank the elders for giving me this opportunity to teach before you and to open His Word and to find strength through His Word. You get a 5-minute break. 5 minutes early. Let's have a prayer. Dear Lord, as we approach your throne of mercy and grace, understanding that through the examples that we find in your word, that we too have an opportunity to seek your spiritual wisdom that is given to us, that is entrusted to us, and that we take that word, and especially the love that is in that word, realizing that not only our souls are valued, but the souls of many others are valued by you. And that we take it as a serious responsibility to step forward, to step out, and to live peaceably among men so that we can share and live your word to bring them to Christ. Please be with us, guide us, guard us, and direct us, and keep us, and forgive us. In Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen.